Hello, and welcome to another edition of What's It Worth? I'm Lathrop Ford, your hostess. This is Andrew Ford, your host. We're going to cut to a commercial. We'll be right back with you. Hello, I'm Lathrop Ford. Welcome. Andrew, tell us what you brought with you today.
We've got a menagerie of objects we brought with us. With the holiday season coming up, we thought we'd bring multiple objects for different collecting possibilities. Of course, if you have any gifts, any interest, of course, Sarasota Trading, 522 South Pineapple Avenue is our downtown location in historic Burns Court. Come say hello. We're there 10 to 8 every day this month, all the way leading up through January 1st. We've brought a few different objects with us. I think I'm going to begin with a Japanese censer. And you can see the beautiful quality and the colors of the enamel work here. You'll notice samurai figures. These are metallic enamels that were done, invented in the early 19th century. They were very rare. These objects were exotic to the continent of Europe as well. And so as Asian pieces were coming into Europe, these were highly prized. The amount of work that goes into the enameling is tremendous. Each color of enameling is a separate firing. So when you see the royal blue ground that begins, you have prunus bushes and figures that are in pinks and blues and greens. A terribly painstaking effort. This was probably something that took a gentleman a week or two possibly to make, even possibly longer than that. They would have been in factories at the time in the Edo period of Japanese culture, which would have been before we refer to places as Tokyo, etc.
Tell me about this piece here.
This is a bronze. It's a finely cast bronze. This is of Kaiser Rudolph. And if you look at the quality of the casting on this, it's very likely done by one of the court artists that were working for the nation of Germany at the time. And this would have been an important figure for someone that's maybe a cabinet member in the German government at the time. Very high quality, the original patina. You see him crowned with his original suit of armor here, finished on the backside, beautifully done. This is of Kaiser Rudolph, very likely from I would say this is probably from the late 19th century, but very high quality. It's so interesting to see the chasing of the hair and the quality of the crown and the shield, of course. And of course, if you were a normal peasant, you couldn't afford armor like this. So this is the finest armor from the period, and it's embellished armor. It's not armor to stop an arrow or to stop a blade. This is really court armor that he liked to have been seen in. Often you would see him with his staff in his hand. And of course, if you notice the profile of the nose, I don't know if you can see that, it had a particular facial structure that everyone associates with Rudolph.
What would something like that bring at auction?
This is typically about $1,000 bronze. Of course, if there was some Germans that were involved or people from that particular part of the world, it might bring a premium, but generally this at auction would be a $500 to $750 start, and it might well hammer for well above. It wouldn't surprise me at all if it brought $1,500.
It's a really neat piece. Tell me about this. Of course, I'm a huge fan of anything from Alaska, so please tell me about this.
These are Alaskan carvings done by the Inuit tribes, and they were essentially very simple, typically nomadic tribes that moved about depending on the weather system in Alaska, but often they were carving occupations. Here is a Eskimo capturing a seal. This is a pleasant image of an Eskimo capturing a seal, but often after he would capture the seal, they were there for the fur of the seal. So the seal didn't live much longer after this. But this is a typical carving, heavily polished. You see the footwork here. It's a little bit chased in the base, identifying the seal. You always see them in their heavy outfits because this would have been well below zero at the time. And it's accompanied with a walrus, a standing walrus.
Oh, I love him. Isn't he fun and whimsical?
Yeah, the walrus is slightly different coloration. The value sometimes is based on the coloration of the stones they were using. He is whimsical, and he's kind of a smiling walrus. Same idea. They were constantly carving birds, fish, walrus. They were always carving, again, the occupations of the local tribesmen and what they might be doing. These are still prized today. They go back to Seattle, the Washington area, Portland, Oregon, all the way up through the coast of Alaska. The different tribes, the Kwakiutl tribe, things like that. You'll see these in history channels and things like that. And they're very much carving the same objects they were doing 80 years ago today. Not a lot's changed in the quality of the carving. And these bring quite a premium out west. We sell them both at auction as well as at the shop downtown. An object like this very likely would command $600 to $700.
And how old is it exactly? Do you know?
Not being there when it was carved, we have to make some assumptions on this one. Just judging by the patina and the quality of this, I suspect this is done in the 50s or 60s. It's about a generation old now. It was acquired from an estate in the Oaks, and it's bound for auction. Our next
Wonderful.
auction, of course, is on the 20th and 21st of January. It's our major two-day sale we have in January. Partly fine art, Asian. There'll be a tremendous amount of three-dimensional sculpture, ranging from Inuit sculptures to bronzes. That takes me to my next object here. If you don't mind, I'll skip ahead. These are from the Thai culture, and these were more for prayer-type items. You can tell the quality of this one. It's always rubbed in certain areas where it may have been prayed to at one point. This is solid bronze with the gilding, the original gilding on this one. This is a Thai figure, a Thai emperor of sorts. This is a little better quality than you typically see. They make a lot of tourist versions of this one. This was clearly not for the tourism. This was probably a 19th century. And some of these are even not just in Thailand. They go all the way up into the Sino-Tibetan culture as well, just south of China. You'll find these many religious sects that show interest, and the quality of this is tremendous. As I stand here and I look at it, I'm often in awe, and even though I've looked at this multiple times, every time I pick up one of these objects, I see another subtle nuance of some particular symbolism they were trying to associate with the piece. The quality of this is tremendous, and I think you'll be impressed with the gilding if you notice.
So as we travel around the world, of course, we all are out there looking for wonderful things we can bring home and share with our family.
Sure.
What is the do's and don'ts of picking up things like this? What do we
That's a
specifically
good
need
question.
to look for?
That's a good question, and you need to be dubious when you're overseas buying in markets. These markets have been there for hundreds of years. Most of the high-quality antique objects are long gone from these markets. They set up in hopes for the tourists that have gone to the museums and seen pieces like this. In fact, the markets are often set around the museum so that you come out of the museum excited by seeing all these beautiful objects, and you're faced with an object that looks very similar. Often the tourist will buy the object, bring it home thinking it's an early antique.
Sure.
Often it's not. These are still being produced today, but it takes a proper eye to figure the quality of the difference. You can take one look at it and tell the quality of the casting, the honesty of this piece, where it's rubbed in all the right parts. It's a beautiful object. And these range in size. If you go to Thailand today or Burma, you'll see pieces. They could be as large as 10 feet tall. These come out of Buddhist temples. And this was very likely in a Buddhist temple, possibly encased inside a shrine of sorts. The quality is better than it should be. On a scale of 1 to 10, it's a 9.5.
Wonderful. Love this. Tell me about this piece here.
Also, a Thai Buddha, beautifully carved. This is in wood as opposed to bronze. This comes to us actually with a certificate of authenticity from a very important Thai gallery that's been handling these over the past years. They've identified this as 18th century. A little bit of the edification of some of these objects. We've come a long way over the past 50 years as far as being able to identify the age of these objects. Being an appraiser, I'm probably more comfortable calling this 19th century.
Okay.
Sometimes the COA, the certificate of authenticity, is only as valuable as the person that signed the certificate. So you have to be dubious sometimes when it's a gallery signing for these things because they're self-serving and they might identify it as 18th century. I feel more comfortable calling it 19th century, but it could be early 19th century. At this point, it's nearly 200 years old. And again, you'll see the heavily gilded areas, and you'll see the rubbed areas where it was maintained and handled. This came to us from an interesting collection, Heinrich Hamburger, who is now currently let me get this correct, he is the head diplomat to Southeast Asia for the entire European Union.
Wow.
17 countries. And this was in his personal collection before they left town. His wife was a professor at the Ringling Museum. She has since moved to Palm Springs Desert. In my understanding, he still lives in Vienna. They have a home in the outskirts of Paris. It's a very interesting, and they were dignitaries to some degree in Thailand at the time, and they were able to buy better quality objects. A lot of these are not able to leave the country. You know, China, of course, has laws against taking antiquities out of the country. Italy, to be well known, you see all the Italian paintings that have come out of Italy. They can't leave without the right documentation these days, and the government feels as though they own all the early antiquities. In Italy as well, you have the same problems in Russia. Multiple nations have these laws. It's to stop the black market trade, which typically in these countries, it still exists today. They're doing major sales, selling things to the United States. Australia has been known to buy many of these objects based on where their island of Australia is. It's sort of in between. It's easier to get to from Asia, and you'll find a lot of these pieces end up there. But this one came to us from a pretty interesting provenance. This was the Hamburger family, and Pamela Hamburger was kind enough to sell me this before she left town, and it's really quite a neat object. You can see this and meet this at Sarasota Trading. It'll be there for sale over the holidays again. Bring in the family. Feel free to come to us. We do a lot of business for gifts over the holidays. And why go to a big box store when you can shop local and buy a really honest piece that will be with you for a long time?
It is amazing how much ends up actually from all over the world in Sarasota.
Sarasota's a
We're
very
so blessed.
international town. When I first started looking at estates here in Sarasota, I was meeting doctors that came here from China, Germany, Austria, Russia, England, Paris, the Middle East, Cairo, and bringing with them objects that had interest. A lot of the doctors that I've met, they were doing work in the Peace Corps in Africa, and they were acquiring African masks and bringing them back with them. So it's amazing the collections that end up in Sarasota.
I can't wait to travel with you, my friend.
I look
can
forward
tell
to
we're going to
this.
bring home some wonderful things.
I suspect we will.
Can you tell me about this piece here?
Here, another Thai piece. You see these carved wooden figures. They're either gods or goddesses. Similar, it's the standing Buddha. You see the little mirrored pieces that are stuck into it. It's very typical of
It's very pretty.
Yeah, Tibetan or Thai mainland Thai pieces that you might see. Today you can go to Bangkok. You won't find this one in Bangkok. A lot of the earlier pieces have since left the country and found their way into collections here in the States. However, at our auction, when we're having these sales, I find that the end user, the buyers of these objects at our sales, tend to be galleries in Bangkok and the bigger cities, and they're selling them back to tourists or collectors there as if it's never left the country. So we're acquiring these objects, selling them at auction, and they end up going back overseas. It's amazing. The Four Dragons, Singapore, South Korea, the big banking institutions and big banking centers that have tremendous sums of money. This is exactly the kind of object that you might find. And you'll notice the back of this one. They're typically not gilded on the back side as they were meant to show on the front. And this, again, this is a 19th century object. Very likely came out of a Buddhist temple at one point. The temples have really suffered tremendously. Many of the temples were in important areas for real estate, and for whatever reason, they've been dismantled over the years. And these objects found their way into American collections. And they're inspiring as well. They're beautiful. The symmetry of the carving. This is great quality work. Great quality.
So let's switch gears and start talking about some of the paintings that you brought with you.
Let's do it.
Okay?
Absolutely.
All right.
Here we have an old master painting of a young female. I will just take this off of the easel just to show you typical construction of the painting as well. I want to look in the back and look at the crisscross stretcher that you have here. This is typically a French style stretcher. What's nice to see is the oxidation that you have. Of course, this is a papered background, but if you didn't have the paper here, you'd see the outline of the actual oil on canvas. And this is an honest stretcher. If I were to scrape the stretcher, I would reveal the unoxidized part of the wood. You really want to do that. Again, it's the same with buying paintings as it is buying sculptures and three-dimensional pieces. The back's going to tell you more than the front often. You need to look at the construction. If you're spending if you're not spending a lot of money, but if you're really spending tremendous sums of money, you really want to be cautious. It's easy to fake these things over the years. It's got a 19th century frame with it, but it's very likely an 18th century portrait. And she's very young, so it's kind of an optimistic portrait.
Beautiful.
Often they're of older women at the time. This one's really attractive.
Yes,
really
it is.
attractive.
Absolutely.
Here we have a pair of oval Eglomise plaques. These are a reverse painted glass. And these were done classical scenes, typically with beautiful, elaborate borders, in very simple frames. As they're fairly busy, the images themselves, they don't need a busy frame. These came to us from a Longboat Key collection. These were on LBK for a couple of generations, as a matter of fact. You often will find these in pairs of 4. And these were in America during the Federal period. In England, they might refer to these as Queen Anne period type objects. You've heard of that. Or Georgian. You've heard of Georgian for the reign of all the Georgian kings. In fact, we acquired recently a pair of George VI coronation chairs. There's a pair of coronation chairs that were there just after Edward abdicated the throne, and these were for the coronation of George VI. And if you were seated in the chairs at the coronation, you were able to purchase them. I suspect probably from the House of Windsor. And they were £6 at the time in England. So nowadays these chairs can be found for tens of thousands of dollars.
So what's a quid then?
A quid at the time, £6. To compare that to today, it was a fair amount of money at the time. But a quid is a pound, an English pound. Quid is sort of a slang for the English pound at the time. And £6 today seems like jump change, but at the time, it was a tremendous sum of money for someone to come up with. And this is in the 30s, as you would imagine. And of course, I don't know if you're familiar with King Edward and why he abdicated, but he wanted to marry a commoner. And that was unheard of at the time. And so he let his love follow his passion, and he decided to abdicate from the throne. And that's when George VI came into power and lived for quite some time. It was actually just before the World Wars began, so it was a difficult time of political strife.
I'm very interested in these 2 items in front here. Can you tell me about those?
Yeah, we're going to go back. This is a silver dagger, and the story on this is fantastic. The gentleman that acquired this was working for Hilton Hotels at the time. He was in Southeast Asia, and he would spend time. He was in Tibet many times. On many trips, he would go to Tibet, and he would find monks, and he would offer to purchase the sword with the monk. And often the monk would never sell his sword because it was his personal object. Less about fighting. This is not a defense kind of a thing. This is, again, a beautiful silver scabbard with silver handle here. But he told me that what he would find is if he brought a bottle of wine and gave it to the monks, that often that was all it really took in order for them. A bottle of wine and a $20 bill American is what he said he would purchase most of these objects for. And they are absolute works of art. Often this one identifying a dragon here with a multi-clawed dragon.
It's really beautiful.
They're beautiful. This is a low-grade silver, probably something like a 700-degree silver.
Hold it up one more time for them. Great.
700-degree silver. And again, you see the original blade in here. It's got the original blood groove. It was meant to be used. It's extremely sharp and really fantastic quality. And I just love the story of how the gentleman Herman acquired this, as well as this other knife that you'll see here, which is an ivory handle, silver scabbard. I originally thought this was a Thai knife and blade. it's been brought to my attention that it's more likely golden triangle. But what's really fascinating about this knife is the spine on the knife itself. And I just want to show you this. Here's the knife. It's got the blood groove. But on the spine, it's marked on the spine for how far one might put this into a corpse of another body. And this is a way to decide how deep the sword went in there. You don't see this very often. This is a rare bird I'm holding in my hand.
And I can
here.
see an X, so normally X's mean game over.
Well, I suspect you could be right. And you'll see that it's identified here with the different hash marks on this one for how far it might have gone in. You know, could have been an animal, but these were really, this was made for a wealthy man. This was not your average foot soldier. Again, heavily adorned in silver and ivory, extremely wealthy gentlemen, and they're engraved on the blades. And if you turn it to a particular angle, you can see the quality of the carving and the incised marks here. Again, I'm just fascinated by the spine on this one. You see that thick spine, but the way they engraved it on the top, it's fascinating. Fascinating.
It's beautiful.
And it's another object that was acquired in Southeast Asia on this gentleman's trip. He was there in the 1960s. I think he might have been there even, I don't want to do this to him, but I think he might have been there in the late 50s and early 60s. He's getting on in the years, and he's been selling us these objects. So we're very lucky to get these pieces. They're very rare. I can't sell this at auction, this particular knife, as it has an ivory handle on it. And I think you're familiar with the laws with ivory today. Any elephant ivory of any sort, if you haven't got paperwork for bringing it into the country in the early 70s, it mustn't be sold, and it certainly mustn't be brought state to state. There's all sorts of laws against that. So we're seeing auctions today all over the world, but in the U.S., you won't see much ivory being sold. There are certain states that have looked the other way about the paperwork, but it's my understanding that it's illegal to ship these overseas, and certainly state to state. So I suspect this will be coming home with us.
Oh, great. More ivory at our house.
That's
wonderful. Right. Tell me about this lovely bird and wood statue up here.
The bird is a sweet, simple form. It's folk art. This is painted folk art. I think this is of a sandpiper. At least that's the way it appears to me. I suspect it is. This is from the 1940s, 1950s. They're still carving birds today. These are, you've heard of decoys, duck decoys. This, to me, is a little better than a duck decoy. It's a scarcer kind of an object. It has beautiful symmetry. If you look at the streamlined carving of it, it's very simple. However, it's better, I think, than some of the decoys that they're collecting today. It's got a little bit of style, and it is whimsy, and it really has the appearance of an actual sandpiper. You'll see them in multiple colors. They have reference books that have been made about these over the years. The sandpiper is if you've seen them on the running from the
adorable.
Water, they bring a smile to everyone's face. So that's an easy sell.
Well, speaking of smiles, I mean, I have to say, when people walk into our store, their reactions are across the board. They are making comments that I just think maybe you might want to just hear for yourself.
We'd love to.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So we'll show the clip in a minute.
Sure.
Can you please tell us about this painting over here to your far left?
This is a Hungarian artist. This artist over the years was painting. Often you'd see little chickens and little in the foreground. I think we have chickens in the foreground on this one. And this is beautifully done with dappled light, if you'll notice. This one is done by Laszlo Neogrady. And in Europe, if you're looking at a painting, often Americans have a hard time reading the signature because in Europe it's in reverse. It's Neogrady Laszlo. So if you're looking for Neogrady Laszlo in an art book, you will never find him. That's because his name is Laszlo Neogrady and it's in reverse. And I can't tell you how many artists and people over the years that have tried to sell me things have been confused by this. But the European artists, certainly in this area of Europe, the Czech artists, the Hungarians, typically it was in reverse. And he was very stylized with his signature. If you don't know Laszlo Neogrady's signature, you probably have a hard time making this out. We cheat a little bit today. We've learned to use our iPhones and take an actual picture of the signature and enlarge it on the phone. It's gotten a lot easier to figure these artists out.
God bless technology.
Oh, thank goodness. It's very helpful. But this is a typical scene, the thatched roofs. But this is a little better quality with the flower garden. And typically, again, they're smaller little oil on panels. This is an oil on canvas. He took a little more time with this one. I suspect this was what we call an easel painting that was done in the studio. Otherwise, the quick little plein air paintings where he was sitting there sketching something out. This one seems a little more deliberate. This was one that was meant to go to market and probably brought a prize sum of money. Typically, Laszlo Neogrady's works bring $500 to $1,500, and I suspect this would bring the higher end of the spectrum.
So we're going to try and play that clip one more time for everyone, just
Wonderful.
because it's just such a neat thing to see, and so I hope everyone enjoys it. So we're having just a little bit of difficulty. Excuse us. Why don't you play?
I'm going to continue to pull out the pieces here. We have this, of course, you've seen this before. Any young man, every time they come into the shop, if there's a telescope, and not young girls would be happy to gravitate towards it as well, but it's kind of what we refer to as a mantique in the business. This is really a mantique. It's a 19th century telescopic telescope. You hear the word telescope very often, but they're not always telescopic in nature. This one was meant to, not just for adjustment purposes, but because it was meant to go with on the boat. They were not meant to take up much space. This wasn't meant to sit on a splayed easel. This was one that was handheld. And of course, you have the cap that's removed. Often these are lost over the years. And you use the front of this. It has a little sleeve here. And you use this to spot your sight out there. It might be looking for ships on the horizon. Often these were used looking for land. They were, again, navigating from the stars, and they had compasses at the time, but this was a 19th century object, so navigation was a science really at that point, but not an exact science. And so you'd be looking for landmarks, and often this is an English telescope, so it was used very likely frigates and schooners that were coming across the pond from London, possibly Paris, into New York or Boston at the time, would have been the East Coast, and they would have been looking for landmarks. Typically they would come across and they would start up in Nova Scotia and come down the coast and find their way down into New York or Boston. In fact, we have a piece here that is rather interesting. I think I want to pull it out and show you. It's not for sale, folks. I have to tell you, this one is from my own personal collection. But I thought I'd bring it today to show you the construction of a mirror from the 18th century. And I just thought I'd use this today. I'm going to angle it up a little bit. This is a Queen Anne mirror. And this particular mirror belonged to a congressman from the 18th century that happens to be one of my great-great-great-great-grandfathers, Elbridge Gerry, and otherwise known as Elbridge Gerry. And he was the namesake for gerrymandering. If you've heard of the people say gerrymandering, that came from one of my relatives. And he was an interesting character, born around 1744. His mother was the daughter of a merchant. His father was a politically connected merchant as well. And at the time, that was major occupation, and they lived in the Boston area. This actually existed in Boston. Samuel Gerry has an interesting background. He was almost captured by the British troops on April 18th of 1775. You've heard of Lexington and Concord in Massachusetts when the troops were there. He just got out of Lexington and found his way into Boston, just avoiding the British troops, and many of the congressmen and people, this was part of the Continental Cabinet, if you might remember. And his reason he was not an actual signer of the Declaration was that it didn't have a Bill of Rights in the Declaration at the time, and he refused to sign and walked away from the signing of the Declaration at the time. At a later date, he was involved in signing of many, many documents, but this is near and dear to my heart, and it's a part of our own collection at home, and it was given to me never to sell, to hand down to my children and pass down to the next generation. My understanding is it belonged to, let me get this correct, I think this was 7 generations before I got it.
So if it ever showed up in auction, we would be in big trouble. And speaking of the auction, we'd like to share a clip with you just in our last few minutes here, so just so everyone can kind of see what you do.
I believe these are some of the clips from our previous auction.
It is.
These are some of the,
absolutely.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
$1,000. My understanding, we are at 4,000, looking for 42.5. 42.5 I have, looking for 4,500. 47.5 I have, looking for 5,000. I'm at 4,750, looking for 5,000. I'm at 4,750, looking for 5,000. Are we all done and all through at 4,750? Sold at 4,750, bidder 3. Bidder 3.
So I just want to thank you so much for joining us on this evening, and a Merry Christmas to everyone, and a Happy Hanukkah, and a wonderful New Year. And thank you, Andrew, so much for showing us all of these beautiful things.
I love it, absolutely.
They're amazing.
Happy holidays to all of you. Remember to like us on Facebook, and you can see our Facebook post. You feel free to like it and send it to friends. We appreciate everything, and Happy New Year for 2018.